questions. It pronounces without any misgiving that God exists, and it pronounces quite as surely that I am alienated from him. It is, after all, the eloquent silence of God which is the most fundamental argument against his existence. Of course, the silence has seemed to become more deafening as the 19th century progressed. It is a silence, Newman writes, that speaks. It is as if others had got possession of his work. Why does not he, our maker and ruler, give us some immediate knowledge of himself? Why does he not write his moral nature in large letters upon the face of history and bring the blind, tumultuous rush of its events into a celestial hierarchy, a celestial order? Why does he not grant us in the structure of society at least so much of a revelation of himself as the religions of the heathens attempt to supply? Why from the beginning of time has no one uniform steady light guided all families of the earth and all individual men how to please him? Why is it possible without absurdity to deny his will, his attributes, his existence? Why does he not walk with us one by one as he is said to have walked with his chosen men of old time? We both see and know each other. Why, if we cannot have the sight of him, have we not at least the knowledge? On the contrary, he is especially a hidden God, and with our best efforts we can only glean from the surface of the world some faint and fragmentary views of him. So he's here in this remarkable passage in the Apologia. Newman is conceding, of course, to those who had lost their Christian faith in the course of the 19th century with the rise of natural science, biblical criticism, and so on. He's conceding a great deal, that God, indeed, there seems to be this deafening silence. But it is for Newman conscience which provides the answer to the objection, as Newman had already made plain in the last chapter of the Apologia, where again he had evoked the sense of the absence of God with an eloquence of which an atheist would be proud. And these are the remarkable words. I look out of myself into the world of men, and there I see a sight which fills me with unspeakable distress. The world seems simply to give the lie to that great truth, of which my whole being is so full. And the effect upon me is in consequence, as a matter of necessity, is confusing, as if I denied that I'm in existence myself. If I looked into a mirror and did not see my face, I should have the sort of feeling which actually comes upon me when I look into this living, busy world and see no reflection of its creator. I am far from denying the real force of the arguments in proof of a God drawn from the general facts of human society in the course of history. But, and this of course is where Newman makes his appeal to those of his fellow countrymen who had lost their Christian faith. But these do not warm me or enlighten me. They do not take away the winter of my desolation, or make the buds unfold, and the leaves grow within me, and my moral being rejoice. The sight of the world is nothing other than the prophet's scroll, full of lamentations and mourning and woe. In response to this profound mystery, which he says is absolutely beyond human solution, Newman answers, either there is no creator or this living society of men is in a true sense discarded from his presence. But since in words already quoted, Newman cannot ignore that voice which speaks so clearly in my conscience and my heart, it is after all conscience that explains the human condition by making us aware of original sin. Although, however, Newman surely rightly regards the moral argument from conscience as absolutely basic and integral to any kind of theism, he does, as I've tried to show, possess a wider sense of the human heart and its reasons for believing in a personal God. To appreciate this, we need to turn away from his more formal philosophical and theological writing, not to a novel this time, but to his pastoral preaching. In one of the finest sermons he ever preached, as an Anglican in 1837, The Thought of God, the Stay of the Soul, Newman, as the title suggests, maintains in effect that a true humanism implies theism. And here, of course, this is how he's confronting the 19th century, the secularism of the 19th century, that humanism actually implies the existence of a personal God. The more deeply we understand human nature, the more we see that its ultimate needs demand a divine fulfillment. Without God, Newman writes, the human person has faculties and affections without a ruling principle, object, or purpose. Arguing that the happiness of the soul consists in the exercise of the affections, then here is at once a reason for saying that the thought of God and nothing short of it is the happiness of man. For the affections require something more vast and more enduring than anything created. And we are surely reminded of St. Augustine's famous words, "Our hearts are restless till they rest in you." When we read the equivalent in Newman, "He alone is sufficient for the heart who made it." That's Newman's equivalent to those famous words of Augustine. He alone is sufficient for the heart who made it. Other human beings cannot satisfy us, partly because they are transient and unreliable in their frailty. Our hearts require something more permanent and uniform than man can be. Do not all men die? Are they not taken from us? Are they not as uncertain as the grass of the field? But even apart from this, there is another reason why God alone is the happiness of our souls, as Newman explains in this sermon. The contemplation of Him and nothing but it is able fully to open and relieve the heart, to unlock, occupy, and fix our affections. We may indeed love things created with great intenseness, but such affection, when disjoined from the love of the Creator, is like a stream running in a narrow channel, impetuous, vehement, turbid. The heart runs out, as it were, only at one door. It is not an expanding of the whole man. Created natures cannot open us or elicit the 10,000 mental senses which belong to us and through which we really live. None but the presence of our Maker can enter us, for to none besides can the whole heart, in all its thoughts and feelings, be unlocked and subjected. The friendship and sympathy of those closest to us, and of course we remember how highly Newman valued friendship, cannot, for Newman, even that cannot rival the intimacy that we can enjoy with God alone. And he preaches, "It is this feeling of simple and absolute confidence and communion which soothes and satisfies those to whom it is vouchsafed. We know that even our dearest friends enter into us but partially and hold intercourse with us only at times, whereas the consciousness of a perfect and enduring presence, and it alone, keeps the heart open. It is God then who liberates the human heart by freeing it from the imprisonment of self." And this is, of course, very Newmanian note. And we remember, of course, that Newman grew up in the Romantic period, and that he also underwent that evangelical conversion at the age of 15. So there is this preoccupation in Newman with the imprisonment of the self. "Withdraw the object," he writes, "on which it rests," that's the heart, "and it will relapse again into its state of confinement and constraint. And in proportion as it is limited either to certain seasons or to certain affections, the heart is straitened and distressed. If it be not overbold to say it, He who is infinite can alone be its measure. He alone can answer to the mysterious assemblage of feelings and thoughts which it has within it. That is why true happiness depends on belief in God." In Callista, Newman was writing on the level of practical apologetics. Here he is writing in a spiritual vein. But what is so striking is how, outside the philosophical context, it is not the existence of conscience that demands the existence of God, but rather it is the ego that is depicted as finding liberation from its own self-imprisonment in the only object external to itself which can offer that liberation or that personal fulfillment. For the plain psychological reason that a person cannot live without an object, and so either we live in the unhappiness, the prison of our own ego, or we try vainly to find self-fulfillment in other ephemeral, finite beings and things. Well, I turn now to the second part of this lecture, Newman's treatment of the relation of conscience to authority. And of course, the classic text for this is his letter to the Duke of Norfolk, which of course in fact was a slim book, not what we would mention to be a letter, but it was very much the fashion in those days to write in the form of a letter. And this isn't the only book that Newman wrote, apparently in the form of a letter, but of course not really a letter at all. Published in 1875, 5 years after the First Vatican Council. And here he deals with the relation of conscience with authority, in particular the relation of a Catholic conscience with the magisterium of the Church. Again, Newman is concerned with conscience as primarily a sense of duty, a magisterial dictate, rather than as a moral sense or a judgment of reason. To understand correctly the argument of the letter to the Duke of Norfolk, it is important first to understand the historical context in which it was written. In October 1874, William Gladstone, who until very recently had been Prime Minister, published an article which referred in passing to the effort to Romanize the Church and people of England. According to Gladstone, there was no longer any chance of it, now that no one can become her convert without renouncing his moral and mental freedom and placing his civil loyalty and duty at the mercy of another, that is, the Pope. Newman, of course, was referring to the definition of papal infallibility 4 years earlier at the First Vatican Council. Newman welcomed the outburst, which was understandable perhaps in view of the provocative ultramontanism of the ultra-papal Cardinal Manning of Westminster, since it was possible to him to speak against Gladstone, while it would not be decent to speak against Manning. So, once again, as before in his controversy with Charles Kingsley, which led to the Apologia, and again with Edward Pusey, led to the letter to Pusey on Mariology, a chance offered itself to strike a blow against extreme ultramontanism. So Newman has two targets in view, but of course the Manning target has to be covered. During the next few weeks, Newman tried to write something in answer to Gladstone, but without success. Then on the 5th of November, Guy Fawkes Day, I'm sure you understand what Guy Fawkes Day is in England. Guy Fawkes Day, when the Catholic gunpowder plot of the 5th of November 1605 was and still is commemorated in a particular town, at any rate in Sussex to this day, the burning of the Pope in effigy. Gladstone provocatively published his pamphlet, The Vatican Decrees in Their Bearing on Civil Allegiance, a Political Expostulation. Wonderful titles they had, those Victorians, for their books. Gladstone thought mistakenly, of course, that the Pope had been behind the Irish Catholic bishop's opposition to his Irish University Bill, which had failed to get through Parliament after Irish members had voted against it. His sense of grievance over this defeat in March 1873, which led to the fall of his government in February 1874, had been aggravated a few months later by the resignation of the Marquis of Ripon from the cabinet as a prelude to his becoming a Catholic. It was impossible in those days for a Catholic to serve in the British cabinet. Gladstone's pamphlet then, which was popular in turn and became a bestseller, was no mere academic exercise, and Newman saw immediately that it would have to be answered. Once again, he attempted without success to meet the challenge, although this time there was something substantial to answer. Gladstone was too rambling and slovenly to answer with any logical exactness. Now, not only was Newman not a politician, but he felt he had too little knowledge of the world at large. He regarded it as the toughest job I ever had. Unless he was really effective, he would only harm the Catholic cause. So I hope it's clear that what Gladstone was of course implying, more than implying, was that Catholics were no longer could be counted as loyal subjects of Her Majesty, and so if the Pope told a Catholic to murder Queen Victoria, then the Catholic would have to carry out that order. I mean, that's the context we have to remember in which Newman was writing. And anyway, he found it very difficult to write the book and made several false starts, and it was the most strenuous work he'd undertaken since the Apologia. He had never thought he would ever write against Gladstone, who after all was a friend of his, but however provocative the Ultramontanes, there was no excuse for accusing Catholics of being moral and mental slaves. It was unfair and untrue. Newman completed his response to Gladstone after a month's continuous writing, and the pamphlet, which was actually 150 pages of